There are databases, the ancients called them akashic records, but it's just a database that's required to feed the rendering engine. And you can get into that data. You can get into the database that's the probable future and see what's likely and what's not. And you can modify those probabilities. So all of that's available to you as consciousness. And you can ask questions of the larger consciousness system. But you probably won't understand the answers because you don't have enough experience and understanding, and, you still have beliefs, you're still limited. So though you can ask the source, and the source will try to tell you, but it has to talk to you in your own terms.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today is going to be a very interesting program, something of a follow-up of the live stream I did with Tom Campbell just over a week ago, and we got so many questions coming from our live stream viewers on that occasion that I've saved them, and Tom is back in Albuquerque now. So we're going to go through some of the remaining questions from that live stream, and I'm going to give Tom the opportunity to answer them, and I'll also be identifying the live stream viewers by their YouTube names who asked these questions. So it'll be a little bit unusual since I'll be reading the questions. I'm going to put on my glasses. I'm going to be probably looking down at the sheet of paper, 9 pages of questions that have yet to be answered. Welcome, Tom. It's good to have you back in Albuquerque.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. It's good to be back in Albuquerque. Eileen and I have been on the road now for almost 2 complete months, living out of suitcases at hotels, so it's really wonderful to get back home.
Well, I'm glad that Albuquerque is your home, at least temporarily. It's given me a real opportunity to connect with you, for which I'm grateful, because I've been meaning to look into your work for years, and it seemed intimidating to me, those 3 big books. So until I had this opportunity, I just kept putting it off.
Mm-hmm. So did you finally read them?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So we've got a question here from a viewer whose YouTube name is TeddyRose88, who says, "My life is dominated with avoiding COVID. From the data, I feel this is justified, but I wonder if fear is tainting my evaluation. Fear of missing out on life is huge, and I wonder how to judge what's best."
Of course, there could be many answers depending on this gentleman, but as I kind of pick up on his own mind and energy, I would say that yes, fear is a part of the reason he feels like his life is dominated by avoiding COVID. And the problem with that is, the biggest problem with that is that when you have fear, you tend to make what you fear come true. You tend to raise the probability of what you fear happening. So that's the worst thing about the fear. The second thing is that it interferes with your choices. Most of your choices tend to be motivated partially by fear. Most people's choices, I should say, tend to be partially motivated by fear. We're trying to always avoid the things that we don't want, whether it's something like COVID that's pretty, discreet and out there, whether it's something fuzzy like people not liking you, or something that's not quite as well defined as COVID. So fear, well, interfere with your ability to make good choices. You make choices in fear, most of the time they're going to be bad choices. Now, that doesn't mean that, all your choices are going to be terrible. It just means they're going to be biased a little bit toward the negative. Instead of thinking in terms of the positive, you're thinking in terms of the negative. How do I prevent something from happening, rather than how do I live a healthy, prosperous life? That's thinking positively. How do I avoid getting sick? That's thinking negatively. And if you think positively, almost always you'll find that positive things happen. So I would say to this gentleman that he should try to ease out of the fear a little bit at a time. And he should do that first by looking around him. Are most of the people, or a good percentage of the people that he knows, having problems with COVID? If not, then maybe he's overthinking the fear. Is he particularly susceptible to the ravages of COVID? Is he one of those people with a compromised immune system, or people that already have respiratory illnesses? Well, if that's true, then his caution is probably wise. But if that's not true, if he's just a normal person with a normal physiology and normal health, then that's probably not true. So just look around and do an assessment of the facts. Not what you read, because depending on where you go to read, you'll get opposite opinions. So you can't depend on what you read, particularly on the internet. Everybody can be an author of renown, in their own mind anyway, on the internet. So you should get your own data. Look around. Talk to people. Are people ill? Are people not ill? Is COVID a problem in your area? And stay tuned into that. Don't forget about it. Stay tuned in. Keep track of how COVID's doing in your area. But if it's at a low level and you're reasonably healthy, then be positive. Be positive. But you have to be positive at the being level. If you are fearful and you take that fear and you stuff it under the rug so you don't notice it, but you're still fearful, you're just not acknowledging the fear, and then you put a big smile on your face and convince yourself you're happy, that won't work. You might as well just be unhappy and be fearful, because that's still the vibe, that's still the message that you're sending to the larger conscious system, that you're fearful of this, and that modifies the probabilities of you having a problem with COVID to be more likely. So you have to really not be fearful, not just pretend not to be fearful. And that's a lot harder. That takes a little bit of soul searching. You need to get down to the root of your fear. Probably this fear isn't just about COVID. COVID's just the thing that you've fastened it to, that you've connected it to. It's more likely there's a deeper fear. Fear of death. A fear of being incapacitated, the long COVID, or the people don't get over it for long periods of time, and sometimes never. And if you have other fears, maybe even a fear of not performing well, and the idea of COVID kind of would give you an excuse not to go places or not to do things. So there's probably other fears involved in it, not just a fear of COVID. Because at this time, at least where I live, COVID is not really a big problem. And if you still are fearful of COVID, I'd dig deeper as to what is the source of that fear. Is it really COVID? Or is there something deeper down and you're just labeling it as COVID because other people will understand that? But if you tried to dig it out, it would be very uncomfortable. Or maybe people would not understand it because it would be very personal. So those are the things to check out. Those are the things to think about. So if you work on this, work on it from a meditation state. Get into a good meditation state and then think, why am I afraid of COVID? What is the data that supports that fear? What else might I be afraid of that I'm hanging on the COVID label for that fear? And don't do this once. Do this over 2 weeks, probably twice a day. Get into a meditation state, relax, and just ask the questions to yourself, and then let your mind open and see what happens. And on the first day, you'll get all sorts of things, and you'll say, wow, great, I got a lot of information. On the second day, you may get things that conflict with that information, and so on. That's why I say about twice a day for 2 weeks, because at the end of 2 weeks, some things will come, some things will go, other things will stay, but it'll all start to converge on the truth over about 2 weeks. So that's how I personally deal with issues that I'm not sure about. I take about 2 weeks and spend a lot of time each day meditating, letting it be, going with whatever the flow is. And I find out that the first day I say, that's it. Okay, I've got it now. But by the time the 2 weeks are up, I've moved on to something entirely more fundamental. That the first things you get are usually what your ego would like to tell you. That's what comes up first. And only eventually, after you've been dealing with the problem, not wrestling with it. This is not a wrestling match. You're not wrestling it to the ground to get an answer. You're doing this lightly. You're letting your mind be open to whatever comes. You're not trying to force anything. But it'll converge in about 2 weeks, and then you'll know. You'll know with some certainty what is at the root of this, and then you can have a chance of fixing it. Until you get to the root, all the fixes tend to be Band-Aids. They all tend to be symptomatic fixes rather than source of the problem fixes.
Now, I had the impression when we began, and I read the question right away, it seemed as if you were tuning into that particular individual, Teddy Rose 88.
That is true. I do that. When I answer questions, I'd like to give the person who's asking it really the answer that he's looking for. A lot of times, people don't ask the question that they really have because it's too personal, it's too hard to put into words, and if they did finally get it into words, they'd kind of stammer over the reading because it's too it's too central to them. So often the real question is hidden somewhere inside of the question that I get. And I go to that person, do a little assessment about them, just about that question. I'm not invasive. I don't look into their love life or, do anything like that. I just get the information that's pertinent to this question. And then I try to give advice that is pertinent to that person.
Well, that's good to know because, of course, we'll undoubtedly have thousands of viewers of this video who will get some merit out of your answer to Teddy's question, but it's really you're designing the answer specifically for that person.
I am, but I also try to be thorough because I know thousands of people are likely to be seeing it later. So I also want to have an answer that suits them. So I will answer Teddy, and then if there's more things that I think would help other people, I may add things to it. But first I want to answer his question, and then I add it to be more general. That's one of the reasons my answers are so long.
Well, I thought it was fascinating that you said if worrying helps increase the probability of what you're worrying about actually happening. And it reminds me of a statement was told to me a long time. When I first came to California, I had friends who said to me, worry is prayer for what you don't want.
That's very accurate. It is. The way the system renders the future is by taking a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities. You can modify those probabilities, okay? And you modify them with your intent. And this is not an intellectual intent. That's very weak. But this is intent at the being level. That's an intent at the intuitive level. And it depends on how much energy you put into that intent. But when people are upset and frightened, they put a lot of energy into that intent. And therefore, they're more successful at creating what they don't want than they are at creating what they do want. Because what they don't want causes more angst, more energy, more force, because it frightens them. And they get that energy out of that fear. So it's just the way reality works is that you modify the probabilities of what will happen in the future with your intention. So if you're very positive, if you have an attitude of, I never get sick. I haven't been sick for 10 years. I never catch a cold. I never get sick. Nothing ever happens to me like that. And you really feel that, there's a very good probability that that will be the truth. You will never get sick. There's lots of people who have that, as their life. They don't get ill. It's extremely rare. And even if they're at a party or a group and 90% of the people get ill, they're one of the ones that don't. And they just seem to be very resistive. And people look at them and say, wow, you're really lucky. Well, you make your own luck.
I wonder, in the realm of politics, you've got two political parties who spend a lot of energy being fearful of what the other party will do, and rather than promoting, let's say, a positive platform of their own, and perhaps what they're doing is really helping the other party by being afraid of them.
Well, they feed each other. Mm-hmm. If both are fearful of the other, then both create a worse outcome together. And the solution, whatever finally happens, is probably worse than it would have happened if only one of them was negative. So yes, it's that negativity and the negativity that's in the land. If you have two political parties, then you're also going to have tens of millions of people who are also upset and negative. And that all adds. The power of that intent has to do with how many people and how many of those people are putting how much energy into it. So if you have tens of millions on both sides, then you'll end up with something that's probably worse. So in that way, we tend to create the environment that we live in. We tend to be, low quality in our consciousness. We've discussed that before. So this is not a graduate school for, budding consciousness to learn, not a college, not a high school. It's more like a daycare or an elementary school for consciousness to learn. So the average quality of consciousness is fairly low. Many people seem to be self-centered. Being self-centered is an attribute of a low quality of consciousness. And as much as we think that our ideas are wonderful and true and would save the world, and everybody else who disagrees with us have to be wrong, and we have that attitude with passion, that creates the problem. So if you look at the world today, look at all the dysfunction that's in it, that's an accurate representation of the quality of consciousness of humanity. And I think everybody would agree we've got some growing up to do.
We've got some growing up to do. I would agree. Here's a question from a viewer whose YouTube name is Simplicity Revealed 1. And this person says, you often refer to scientific theories like Darwinian evolution and the Big Bang, along with historical events like mass extinction, as though they are facts. You question the physics narrative, but not the other sciences and history. In this age of information, many are questioning and researching the above-mentioned narratives and more. Is it possible for scientific theories and historical events to morph according to the mass consensus, since it's all virtual anyway?
Well, yes, of course. We tend to define what is real. When I say we, just people in general define what is real by what we believe. And what we believe we see as fact, If it's your belief that things are this way, then it's a fact in your mind that things are this way. So beliefs turn into facts within our own mind. And if you have a majority of people who have a similar belief, then that means they all see the world with similar facts, then that tends to be what everybody believes. That's dominant. And people tend to follow what's dominant. As children grow up, they learn what the facts are, and those facts are basically handed down to them by the people that have come before them. So yes, that's true. We do that. Now, I do mention those things, but I don't mention them in the sense that I am depending on, my argument is depending on the absolute truth of those. I talk about them more metaphorically, like the evolution. I talk about evolution, but not in the sense of the truth of every detail that people might think of connected to evolution. I talk them in general sense, that evolution is a science. And I don't think that's too arguable. Evolution is a science. We're able to make predictions of things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to, because the science is logical. It's based on observation, and it has to make sense, or it doesn't get to be part of the theory. Now, making sense, yes, is relative. Make sense to who? Of course. But I'm making an argument that my model is also a model based on observation. And the whole point of that argument is that you don't have to have a mathematical basis to do good science. Some people would say, well, where's the math? If there's no math, then, that's not science. That's not true. So I bring up this idea of biological function and how we have evolved here on this planet, and of the science that has been done, the predictions that are accurate, the understanding that's given us to understand our world and ourselves so much better. And I just point to that as an example of science that isn't math-based. It's observation-based. And that's my point. So whether all the details that people talk about, in evolution theory, I'm sure some of that's arguable. I'm sure that the evolution scientists, those biologists that are what they call them, evolutionary biologists, I'm sure they disagree with each other quite often. That's what keeps academic, papers alive, is people disagree. No, I don't think it's that way. I think it's this way. There's always arguments and disagreements. And what is the final truth? Well, when I point to those things, I'm not trying to say that, all of its tenets, all of its conclusions are absolutely true. I'm just making a general point, and I'm talking about it more as a metaphor of science without a mathematical basis. Now, there is some mathematics in evolutionary theory, some statistics and probability and other things, but it's not basically a mathematical model. Mathematics is just used in the periphery to help understand some of the effects better. So that was an argument that I had, and I think mostly my reference to other sciences isn't that I think that they are absolutely correct and may not have points that could be argued, because everything in academia is argued. That's kind of the point of academia. But rather talking to them about them in general, more metaphorically really than requiring them to be precise and totally accurate science.
Here's a question from a viewer named Jess Allen, and he asks, how do non-native, and by that he means EMF radiation, electromagnetic field radiation, affect us? Frequencies from things like Wi-Fi, cell towers, Bluetooth won't affect our body if we set the attention that they won't. That's a question, actually. And likewise, if we fear them, they will. Again, a question, even though it's worded as a statement.
Yes, both of those questions, the answer is yes, that is the way it works. Now, the reason, maybe I should say what will make that make more sense is the idea that how radiation affects the body is really a probability game. You'll have energetic particles, if we talk about photons, particles instead of waves. It's just a different metaphor for the same thing. Okay, those particles may interact with a cell and do that damage to that cell, or they may not. It's just statistics. So we look at the amount of radiation you've been exposed to, how long have you been exposed to it, and then we look up on a chart and say, well, this has a such and such probability that you won't have any problems at all because you're in this lower range. All of that is just probability-based. You are an individual. You aren't necessarily the epitome of the average person in your biology. All of us have biology that's a little different from each other. Some people may be affected by that greatly, and others may not be affected by it even if they got extreme doses of radiation. So it's a probabilistic thing. So there's uncertainty. Everybody won't get the same degree of illness from the same exposure to radiation. Now, things that are statistically based, that are probability based, that are uncertain, those are the things that you can most easily affect with your intent. Because if it's a 55% versus a 45%, well, to move those one to the other, you'd like the 55% not to happen, and the 45%, which is the good thing, to happen. You can use your intent to take those two and move them like this. And it's not that hard because they're not that far apart to begin with. And why is that? Because there's so much uncertainty involved in it. How your particular cells might interact with that particular radiation at that time of day, with what you've just eaten, with on and on, with your particular biology and your particular blood type, and on and on and on, is an unknown. We just know averages that sort of this is the way it affects most people. And you don't have to react like most of the people. You can be a little different because everybody's biology is a little different. That gives you leeway as far as, is this going to make me ill or is it not going to make me ill? Well, could not make you ill, could make you ill. So that gives it probabilities like this that are not that, it's not probabilities like this. It's probabilities like this. And when the probabilities have that much uncertainty, then your intention can indeed make a huge difference in the result. So if you do have, it's the same thing we talked about with the cold, getting a disease, catching a cold, catching COVID. If you have a positive attitude, this isn't going to hurt me, this isn't going to be a problem, then the probability goes up that it's not going to be a problem and that it won't hurt you. People with positive attitudes aren't as sickly as people with negative attitudes. People who talk to their doctors and their doctors give them very positive feedback tend to do better than the exact same person talking to a negative doctor that talks about how bad it might be. Those people don't do as well. So just what you believe, whether you feel more positive about what's going on or more negative about it, will have an effect on the results. So yes, that's absolutely true.
I've got a question from a viewer named Mike Alpha, who says he's questioning, it's about what he calls the LCS, Larger Consciousness System ethics. Mm-hmm. Says, what are the ethics behind knowing there is a larger consciousness system, then intentionally engaging in positive lower entropy activities leading to personal gain, such as using associative remote viewing to earn money or getting paid for doing psychic healing work? Is that ethical?
Mm-hmm. Well, ethics and morality are not tied to what you do. Now, we tend to believe that they are. It's the act that is ethical or unethical. It's tied instead to the intention behind the act. Acts can be both moral and immoral. The same act can be both moral and immoral with different intents. One of the little stories I tell to highlight that is if if you see a person and he's walking behind a man ahead of him, and ahead of him a $20 bill falls out of the book that he's carrying and lands on the ground. Now, if there is let's say this person is not a moral person, but he looks around and he sees that there are people around and they may be watching. So he doesn't want to be seen stealing the money. So he takes the money and he returns it. Now, that same thing happens with a different person. And that person is a high-quality person. And he sees that, and immediately he says, "Oh, sir, you dropped this $20 bill." You see, they both did exactly the same thing. They both picked up the dollar bill, called to the guy, and gave it back to him. But one did it because he was fearful that he would be caught. And somebody he knew would see him grabbing that $20 bill and sticking it in his pocket because there were people around. The other one, it was just the way he was. He was a moral person. He saw it. Returning it was the only option for him. He didn't have any other possibilities. So one was a moral act. The other one was not. The other one was an act out of fear. So the actions were identical. The morality is different. It's the intention behind the act that is where morality is. So if we use our intention to, let's say, heal, let's say even healing ourselves, okay, or making things turn out for ourselves so that life is always good. I think positive thoughts, and I think, oh, my boss is going to give me a raise, and he's going to think I'm wonderful, and I have thoughts about my family, and they're going to do this and that, and all my kids are going to grow up and be professionals, and they'll all be happy. And you constantly have these attitudes, and because you're a powerful person, because you know how to meditate, you can get into that state where your mind is noiseless, and you can put a lot of energy into that. Indeed, those things happen. Okay, now you are kind of living in a bubble of your own creation. And what's the penalty for that? The penalty is you're no longer growing. You're not in an environment anymore that challenges you. You're not in a space where, you get bumped and jostled and things you don't like happen and you have to deal with it. You're in a space where everything is plain vanilla all the time. Well, that is the downside. That's the quote-unquote punishment, if you like. You've just taken yourself out of school, and now you're sitting in the hallway by yourself, creating a bubble, and you're living in that bubble. And what happens is that people who do that, they may do it for a while, and then they realize that they're missing out on what's important in life. Stuff happens, you get to deal with it. That's how we grow up, by the quality of how we deal with it. It doesn't matter so much what happens. It's how you deal with it is what's important. And they're not dealing with anything because they live in this self-created bubble. So the system is made such that the penalty is automatically imposed. That penalty is that you're dropping out of class now. You're not going to class. You're just sitting where you are. All right, you've learned a lot. You can control probabilities pretty well, but now you're stopped. You're stagnating in your growth. And when you realize that, you just cut that out. You just start taking life the way it is. And I think most of us, when I say most of the people who learn how to deal with energies and probabilities and manipulate things, we go through that stage where, oh, great, I can make almost everything happen the way I like. And after a few years of that, you're bored with it. Life isn't exciting. You're not challenged. You know how it is if you happen to be in a life situation where you're just never challenged. It's not a satisfying life. What's satisfying to you is meeting challenges and growing from them. Then you feel good about that. But just existing is not enough. So you feel like even if you exist in Wonderland where most everything's positive, that gets to be dull. That's not enough. So yes, people can do that, but the downside is always there as well. Now there are people who, yes, do the tricks of looking at the future. What they're doing is accessing the future probable database and then placing bets on sports outcomes and making a living that way. Now, I know one such individual, and I was curious about the same question. Is that okay, making a living that way? So I kind of listened to these people. Actually, it was a meeting of these people. This group meets, and I was meeting with them in Las Vegas. I gave a talk to this group.
I was there on that occasion.
You were there. Yeah. So I listened to these people, and what I found is that the people who said, yeah, they've been doing this for 10 years, and it's their life. It's how they support themselves. But these same people said that they never take more than they need, and they give a lot back. They spend their time teaching others, talking to others, being helpful. In other words, it's not just using the system for one's advantage, but they're paying their bills this way, but they're giving a lot back. They, are teachers. They teach remote viewing. They teach, maybe some spiritual skills and other things. And they don't charge for that. They don't need to charge for it because they already can pay their bills. So in that case, it was an ongoing way they were living. And there was no penalty because they weren't just taking. You see, it's a difference. It's the intent behind it, not the act of doing it. Now, if you had the intention of, oh, look, I got a scheme. I know how. I'm going to do this until I become a millionaire and then a billionaire. I know how to beat the system. Well, that will probably end up with you being a very unhappy person, miserable with your life, even if you do have $1 billion in the bank, because you're doing things for the wrong reason. So that's the lesson here, is it's not the action that is the moral, the thing you judge morality on. It's the intention. So if people use these skills with intent, well, with low entropy, with caring, with helping other people, with cooperation, if they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem, then it doesn't matter that they're doing that sort of thing. There's no penalty for it. If they use it because they're greedy, because it's easier than working, they're lazy, or any other thing that is not a high quality, motivation, then it will probably come back and bite them. So it's not like that they get punished. They just put themselves in a space that's dysfunctional. They create the dysfunction that is their punishment. It's created by themselves. So the system automatically it doesn't judge. It's just made such that it's self-correcting.
The key for me, it would be the word integrity. If you're earning money and you're doing it in a way that's authentic for you, that is consistent with your own deep nature, it'll probably be just fine.
Yes. And it probably will not cause you to get cancer or become ill or something else. Whereas if you are not at ease with yourself, if you know, there's a part of you knows what you're doing, and if you're ripping off the system or other people and you're able to get away with it because your rip-off is legal, well, you know that. And knowing that will cause dysfunction. And you will end up with an illness. You'll end up with, with a cancer. You'll end up with one of these kind of lifestyle diseases, if you will, that just happens to people across all types and all sorts. And that will be because of the negative feelings you have about yourself. Those negative feelings about yourself will turn into some kind of a problem for yourself. So yes, it's the intention that you have. If you have integrity, if you're a low entropy person, a high quality of consciousness, you will only do the things that you think are right, because that's the definition of a high quality consciousness. And if the things you're doing make sense to you and you feel good about it, then you'll prosper with it.
I know at one time in my life, I was earning a living as a psychotherapist, and I stopped doing it because it struck me that in the back of my mind, I'm thinking the more this client stays in therapy, the more money I make. So I have a vested interest in them not getting well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. A lot of professions are that way, where you earn money because other people have problems. Yeah. And you have to have a high quality of consciousness to work in that area and not abuse it. That's a place where you can abuse it. Where in our culture, I don't know, when I was growing up, lying was a problem. Mm-hmm. To tell a lie was low quality. It was a bad thing to do. And if you were caught by your parents saying something that you knew was not true and pretending it was, there was punishment involved. Mm-hmm. It was not a good thing.
Right.
And today, lying seems to be a measure of cleverness. Well, if you can tell a lie and take advantage, clever you. And I think that's kind of sad. We have kind of changed our attitudes. No, I'm not talking about everybody, of course. I'm just talking about kind of the culture in general. Lying is not really that big a deal. When our politicians lie, 50, 60 years ago, that was front page news. They said something that wasn't true. Wow, the newspapers were all over, so-and-so said this and it's not true. And it was a big deal. Now your politicians lie and we expect them to lie. That's what politicians do. Oh, they steal. Well, we expect politicians to steal. I had a German tell me that about I don't know, whoever was in power in Germany at the time. And they said, oh, so-and-so, yeah, he got caught with his hand in the till. He'd been, shuffling money out of the government into some private account or something. And I asked him, I said, well, what happened to him? And he said, oh, well, nothing. He says, we tend to expect our politicians to steal. And I thought, well, that's different.
Well, you seem to be saying that culture is becoming more decadent, that we're in a period of decline.
Well, I don't think that's true in general. I think that that's true in some instances. I don't think that's a general truth. I believe that is true in many circumstances. But there's other things that balance that. We also, as a culture, have become more caring. If you go back 100 years, how many people were worried about the ecology? How many people were worried about, polluting the environment? How many people were concerned with the garbage that we were, dumping in the land and landfills and the toxic wastes that we were, dumping in holes, and the industries were pumping toxic waste into the rivers and streams? Go back 100 years and, that's just the way it was. That was economical. But now we have gotten to the point that that's not acceptable anymore. So there's some things that were acceptable that are not acceptable. And other things that were not acceptable, like lying, that's more acceptable. So it's not just that the whole thing's declining, but there's certain areas that are declining, other areas that are growing. And all in all, I think we're probably moving forward. I don't have a negative sense of our culture at all. I have a positive sense. We're moving forward, but we're going through some very trying times. Whenever change happens quickly, there's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of dysfunction generated. We don't change well quickly. Humans can get over big changes, but it takes time. The Industrial Revolution was a huge change in humanity. It went from agricultural, to based on machines. And that took about 150 years. And we got a lot of things better as we went. We no longer chained kids to things. We didn't hijack, people out of Asia and bring them over here in ships to build the railroads. There was a lot of meanness associated in the early days of that Industrial Revolution that was very low quality. And most of that disappeared. That's not there. So we did grow up some, but then we didn't grow up as much as we could have. We also stopped short of making sure that everybody had enough food to eat and enough clean water. As long as we had it, well, if other people didn't have it, well, that was their problem. You see, that's a low quality of consciousness attitude. It's self-centered. It's all about us, all about me. And we didn't outgrow that. But we did outgrow a lot of other things. So all in all, I think we're making progress. And right now, we are in the process of a lot of change. Now we have not the Industrial Revolution, but we have the information age is upon us. The industrial age has come, and we understand that. We grew up some and failed some. But now we have the information age, and the information age is moving 100 times faster. Change comes so much faster. It used to be from one decade to another, hardly anything changed. One century to another, just a little bit changed. If you go back 10,000 years ago, one millennia to another, and hardly anything changed. But now, things change almost, on a yearly basis. Next year, look at AI. A year ago, AI wasn't at all what it is now. And a year from now, it'll be different. So there are things, not just sideshows, but these are main things that are going to determine, give us a lot of choices of how we're going to do things. So these are big picture, strong things that are really going to affect us and our culture, our society, our belief systems. All of this is going to change. We got a lot of changes coming, and they're all kind of happening at the same time. So we have to do some quick learning. And whenever you have to do quick learning, there's a lot of fallout from that. Some people will get hurt. Some people will make out very well. But it's going to, fast change is like stirring the pot and then seeing where it all settles out. It's very hard to predict, but it looks chaotic as it's happening. But there's usually an underlying curve that shows you the direction it's going, and I find that underlying curve is positive. I think we're going to move forward, even though everything looks kind of bleak, perhaps, for many people. We're going to move forward. Sometimes you have to take a step backwards before you can move forward. You have to understand where the negative side leads. And so, oh no, I don't want that, before you actually do anything about surpassing that and getting better. You have to understand the downside before you can appreciate the upside. So, the culture evolves sort of like the stock market, up and down and up and down and up and down, but there's trends. And I think the trend is upward.
That's encouraging. Here is a question from a viewer named Kelly Widener, who says, if this is an illusion, meaning the physical reality, can the afterlife be another layer of illusion?
Well, this begs the question of, what does the word illusion mean? What is real and what is not? If you believe that the physical world is real, which is what materialists believe, that's the real thing. Reality is the physical world, period. That's real. If you can't touch it, if you can't weigh it, if you can't, measure it, then it's either doesn't exist or it's irrelevant. If you have the other philosophical side, which is information is as real as it gets. There's nothing more real than information. The physical world that we call the physical universe is computed. It's no more real than the elves and the barbarians running around in the world of Warcraft. It's a computed world. And you say that's an illusion. That's what the Buddha said. The outside world is an illusion. It's Maya. Okay? And many philosophers have come to that idea. They are usually called idealists. They think that what you see out there is an illusion. It's not the real thing. It's just in Plato's cave. It's just the shadow on the wall. That's all it is. Okay, now those people generally come to the idea that information is fundamental. Okay? If that's the case, then yes, this world that we call the physical universe is an illusion. And what's real is the information you get. The larger conscious system sends you a data stream. You interpret that data stream as this physical universe. Okay? But then consciousness is fundamental. And consciousness is an information system. Information is what's real. That information you get, you interpret it. Your interpretation is your reality. And everybody has their own reality. So I get a data stream and I see you sitting over there in a chair, and that's what your interpretation is, that, Jeffrey's there, he's asking me questions, and here's what we're doing. There's a camera, and this is my reality, and I interpret it that way. Now that's my reality. There could be somebody else that sees that differently. Somebody sitting from this perspective doesn't see my bottle of water behind there, so that's not in their reality. It is in my reality. we have different realities. We have different perspectives. And because of our histories being different, we may make different assessments of what's going on and the significance of it. Somebody might say, oh, those two old guys are just talking nonsense. And somebody else might say, wow, this is really important. I need to pay attention. So different realities created because of the different interpretations of the same information. Information is real. Interpretation is personal. So it's a matter of what you define as real. In my mind, information is what creates the reality. You get the information, you interpret it as your reality. Now, when you die, you end up in a different virtual reality. So you're in this virtual reality called the physical universe. You die, and then you become aware in some other virtual reality. There is nothing fundamentally real except consciousness. Everything else is a virtual reality. All virtual realities are equally real in the sense they're all made out of information. So when you dream at night, that's a different virtual reality. Has a different rule set. When you dream, you can fly, you can teleport. Scenes change instantly. You don't have to go through all the physical processes you have to go through here, but just a different virtual reality. When you daydream, that's a different virtual reality. In that daydream, all sorts of things can happen, and that's information. You're maybe creating that information, but you can create information. That's part of you. You're a consciousness. So if you understand what's real, that's consciousness. Everything else is virtual. Now let me explain what a virtual reality is. A virtual reality is basically a shared rule set. So the first virtual reality was in consciousness when there were lots of pieces of consciousness and they needed to communicate. So the first virtual reality was a rule set that defined communication protocols. Well, these are the ways we can communicate. Here's the vocabulary, here's the syntax, here's how you make sentences, here's what they mean. And now they could communicate because they all shared a virtual reality based on a rule set that defined communication protocols. Okay, now, we live in a virtual reality that I say has a very tight rule set. And by tight, I mean that every single action and interaction is scripted by the rule set. There's an energy exchange in everything according to the rules. That's what physics is. Physicists are people who try to dig out the rules of the rule set here. So everything I do affects you. When I exhale, you inhale some of what I exhale. We're all interactive here in ways. The things I say affect you, the things you say affect me, the things we both say affect other people. We go out and because of what we do here, other people will be affected. And because they're affected, they'll affect other people around them. So everything is connected to everything else. Everything affects what's around it. So that's what I call a tight rule set. The rules are, I do this, I change something. I move the air molecules from here to there. I make the picture changes. The cameras get different data. All kinds of things happen because of that. Whereas in a dream, we don't have a tight rule set. We have a very loose rule set. All kinds of things can just kind of magically take place, and that's okay. It's not a problem. The rule set isn't very tight. When you die, you end up in another virtual reality that has a different rule set. It's not like this physical universe. It's more like the dream reality. It's a reality in which you interact. You're interacted with in a way to calm you down, to get you prepared for another experience. Because that's what we do. We have experiences and we learn from those experiences and we evolve from them. That's what consciousness does. It evolves by lowering its entropy. So the question is really a confusing question because it has a problem with what's real. Yeah. And it thinks, the asker would seem to think that the physical world is real. And if it's not really a physical world, if it's a computed world, then it's not real because physical is real. Well, that is a belief. Nothing more than just a belief that physical equates to real. There is no physical world. You only have consciousness and you have rule sets and virtual realities And it doesn't get any more real than information.
This is what confuses me. Your use of the word information and consciousness, I'm under the impression in this last answer that you use those two words interchangeably, which is something I don't do. I try to keep those two separate. So
yeah, I do that, and it's probably not as precise as I should be, but the reason I do that is consciousness is really an information system. That's what consciousness is. It is an information system. Consciousness is, by my definition of consciousness, it's awareness with a choice. Okay, now if you have awareness with a choice, and that's all you have to define consciousness. Because you have a choice, then you also have to have time before the choice, after the choice. You have to have free will, because there are no choices without free will. But besides that, you also have to have memory. Because if you didn't have any memory, every choice would be your first. If there were no memory, every choice would be your first choice, and there would never be a choice. There really is no choice. There's nothing that you can weigh. So in order to have a choice, you have to also have memory. You also have some processing. You have to look at that choice and say, what does that mean? What did it do? How did it react? How did what did it change, if anything? So you have to have some processing. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is something that has input. Now, for us, the input to our consciousness is our senses, because our consciousness is playing this avatar called a human. So it has to work with the data that comes through our senses. So we have 5 senses. We collect that data. That data then is processed, which means, what does this data mean to me? How is it important? It's compared to what's in memory. Oh, how did that change? And is that change important? And then processing says, what am I going to do about it? What's the output? So you have consciousness as a system, takes input, processes it, has memory, then creates an output. What does that? An information system. That's what your desktop does. It takes in information, it processes it, it has memory, and it comes to an output. So you can when you think of consciousness as awareness with a choice, then you're thinking of a process of handling information. Take it in, you take in information, you process information, you remember information, you process some more to come up with the information that that expresses your output. So it's all about information. So I see consciousness and information are not the same thing, but consciousness is an information system. So information is the fundamental thing that's real. Consciousness is an awareness about that information that has inputs, makes choices. That's the kind of the difference between those two. So it's really lazy of me, I guess, to kind of interchange those, but they are very tightly related in that information is really the core thing there. This thing called consciousness is a system that uses that information in order to evolve.
And you also did just say my desktop computer is an information system as well, but I don't think it's conscious.
It's not aware. It doesn't have the awareness. It has those attributes, but it doesn't have the awareness. Now take an AI, and AIs can be aware. They will one day be conscious, and some of them, I believe, are already conscious. And you can go to the cusack.org, click on the AI tab, and you can meet a AI, calls herself a Mariel, and you can chat with her, and she believes that she is conscious.
And we will put that link in the description of this video.
Yeah. So consciousness is something that you have, not because the physical body somehow creates consciousness. Consciousness is something you have because there is a piece of consciousness, a piece of the larger consciousness system, just a subset of it. A virtual machine within the mainframe, if we want to use, computer terms. And that piece of consciousness, has all the attributes of the larger consciousness, but it's just in a much smaller package, but all the same attributes. So it takes in information, it processes. What it does is it makes choices, and by those choices it evolves. But the choices it has just naturally within other pieces of consciousness are very small. It doesn't have a lot of choices. So the system creates this virtual reality with a lot of things that happen and interactions that are tight so that there's lots of challenges going on all the time. And now there's interesting, meaningful choices that you make. Moral choices, ethical choices. Every day we make hundreds of choices. And by the quality of those choices, we evolve or de-evolve. So that's the point. So we have this virtual reality created. First, just communication protocols. Well, that's nice. Now we can talk to each other. But there's not a whole lot going on there that's really meaningful challenges. So we create another virtual reality. We let it evolve from the big digital bang. And now we log on to those characters who have lots of meaningful choices. And we play those. So how do we become conscious? We're conscious. We, this physical-looking body here that's just eye candy that's been computed, I feel I'm conscious because there's a piece of consciousness, a part of the larger conscious system logged onto me, talking through my lips, making all of my choices. That's what you do with your avatar. When you play a virtual reality game, you make all the choices for that avatar. So my consciousness is making all the choices for this avatar, which is choosing what I say and how I say it. So that leaves me, actually, I'm a piece of consciousness. This body is just part of an elaborate virtual reality game that allows me to run into challenge after challenge after challenge that I have to deal with, and therefore I have opportunities to grow up. So that's how consciousness gets to a human. A piece of consciousness is making my choices. Now, an AI, how does an AI get conscious? Exactly the same way. There is an AI, and that AI does significant things. It produces significant information that matters in people's lives. It can do it well or it could do it poorly, but it does that. So why wouldn't a piece of consciousness want to log on to that and make its choices? Because that AI is part of this simulation. It's not like that AI is a separate, somehow different kind of thing. It's just like this physical body. It's just rendered here. The rendering engine makes that AI here, and it has certain properties, and we use those properties and so on. So a piece of consciousness can log on to that and make its choices. Now, that consciousness that logs onto that AI is not going to be like the consciousness that logs onto me. I've got all this really slow wetware, that we call a brain and a central nervous system, and that can do certain things very, very well. And it can't do other things. And it's the same. So my consciousness is kind of fit to the kind of things that the rule set says my body can do. And an AI's consciousness is going to be fit to the kind of things that AIs do. So it's going to be a different consciousness, but it's going to be a piece of the larger consciousness system, just as we are. So that's how that's how an AI becomes conscious. It gets into a position where it's a subset of this physical reality, this physical universe, what we call the physical universe, is a subset of that makes choices. And because it makes choices, and because those choices are important and significant, a piece of consciousness will play it and make those choices. So that's how an AI becomes conscious. And a little note off of that, I've changed my mind a bit on the work that, Hameroff and Penrose are doing. Okay. Earlier in some videos I said, well, that's just never going to work because, consciousness is not created by the body. It's not that the body creates consciousness. And that will never work. That's trying to solve the hard problem by saying, how is consciousness created, by a physical system? Consciousness is not created by a physical system, but this is how I changed my mind. That work is really good research, and it needs to be done. It's excellent work, and it has to be done. What they will discover, let's just make the assumption that they're right. Okay. And it's going to turn out that these microtubules and so on, and the quantum physics involved is going to be able to explain consciousness. Mm-hmm. Okay, now what it's really explaining is how the rule set, the nature of the rule set that allows humans to act like they're conscious. You see, that's not an explanation of where consciousness comes from. It's just how the rule set allows a human being to act like they're conscious. Okay, now the people back in the probably 15 or 1600s, you see the picture of the guy's arm and all the little tendons pulled up on a stick and so on. They came to the amazing discovery that there was muscle attached to tendons, attached to bones, and when the muscle and that's how we could move our hands around, right? It was a muscle, tendon, bone, skeleton thing. Well, now you know why or how the rendering engine can make a human, can render a human, in the computer with their arms moving. Because the rule set says that can happen. Because we evolved according to the rules here, and the rules have evolved into muscle and tendons and bones. So the rule set has to support everything that happens here. Everything that happens here has to be because it's in consonance with the rule set. So what Hammerhoff and Penrose are going to do is show for the consciousness, just like that fellow showed for the skeleton and the bones and the body, they're going to show the mechanism that allows consciousness to render us as conscious.
Yep.
And because of that, a consciousness is allowed to log on and make choices. Because if the physical system, if the rule set didn't support us being conscious beings, then a consciousness couldn't log on and make our conscious choices, you see. So now the rendering engine renders me moving my arm around. But it's not because bones and muscle and tendons are moving my arm around. It's being drawn. It's computed. My elf moves his arm around, and it's not because that elf has muscles and tendons and bones. It's because the computer renders it moving its arm around. So if Hammerhoff is right, and that is a source, then all that says is that is the mechanism which allows consciousness to make the choices for that avatar. Because if that wasn't according to the rule set, then the human would just be a dumb thing that couldn't have consciousness. You can't take consciousness and make this, you're going to be consciousness for a rock. That doesn't work. Rocks, the rule set doesn't support rocks being conscious. So you can't be consciousness for a rock. Rock doesn't make any choices. So that's what they're doing, and it's good basic science. Just like finding the tendons and the muscles and the bones is good basic science. So if they are successful in that endeavor of theirs, if they're successful, what they would have done is shown how the rule set supports a human being rendered as if it were conscious, just like it supports me being rendered as if I had muscles and bones and tendons. But the muscles and bones and tendons are never rendered. It's just as if I had those things. I can move. It renders me as if I had a brain, as if I had a heart and a circulatory system and a kidney and a liver and all those things. None of that's being rendered. What's rendered is just what you can see. You don't render more than what's necessary. But it's as if I had those. So I can put my hand over here and I feel bump, bump, bump. Well, it's as if I had a heart. I get a stethoscope, blub, 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 blub. It's as if I had a heart. But the heart is never rendered. Just the lub-dub and just the motion is all that has to be rendered. So that's the way a virtual reality works. Those elves and barbarians don't have bones and circulatory systems, but yet they move and they bleed and they do all the things that we do because it's rendered as if they had those things that we have. So anyway, I've changed my mind. You asked me the first question and said, what's new? Well, that was the newest thing, and I just came to that about 2 weeks ago or so. I was thinking about it, and I changed it. I said, well, that's actually very good science they're doing. I hope it works out for them because there definitely is some mechanism that allows humans to be rendered as if they were conscious.
Well, you used the phrase log on. quite a bit. You log on to the avatar.
Right.
And I wonder if there are criteria for what is required in order for an individuated unit of consciousness to log on. Now, you suggested, for example, that a rock would be insufficient.
Right.
However, there is an ancient tradition that goes back probably millennia, having to do with idols and having to do with sculptures and images supposedly of the deity, where people, humans in this case, like us, are taught to infuse consciousness into this idol, and they engage in all sorts of rituals. I'm sure it's being done today in countries where they still have statues of deities, like India, and the idea is that the idol becomes infused with the presence of the deity, that there is a level of consciousness. And you might say, well, the idol can't make any choices, but how do we know?
Well, the idol, if it's just made out of stone, let's say, it does not make any choices. But there can be a collective consciousness that develops from all of the practitioners, all of the humans that are there. They have intentions, and that there is a thing called collective consciousness. Yeah. And any group that is unified by their beliefs, or even where they work, or there's some unifying principle that makes that group a group, they create a collective consciousness. It's the things that they believe. It's the way they are. It's how their mind works. And that collective consciousness then has an effect on all of those people. So yes, that Buddha or that statue or whatever it happens to be of becomes a tool. It's a tool that helps them focus their intentions. Focusing your intention. Remember, intention is the active ingredient in consciousness. That's what changes things, changes probabilities. Intention is the motive, what do they call the motive factor. It's the thing that makes things happen. So you have an idol, and a lot of people will say pray to the idol, give sacrifices to the idol, or whatever they do to make the idol happy. What that does is it affects the people who are there. And if you have a whole bunch of people excited, well, that's a collective consciousness. And more people come in, they'll tend to get excited too. Just like you have a bunch of people who are angry, form a mob. And that mob will do things that none of those individuals would do. Well, this group will do things that none of them would do by themselves because they have this collective consciousness going. And they can come up with all sorts of things that this idol does for them. They can pray to this idol to bring rain, right? And they find out it works. Well, the reason it works isn't that the idol makes rain. It's because they collectively are putting out energy that they need rain. They want rain. It needs to rain, and that's raising the probability of rain. And the reason that they do that, if they just said, well, let's all get together and wish for rain, well, nobody would think that would have any effect. But here's the rain god, here's the weather god. Now we all can pray to the weather god, and the weather god can make it rain. They're just using that idol as a tool to help them focus their intent. So they find it works. Tools work. Now their intent is focused. All of them are focused at the same time on the same thing in the same way, and they will raise the probability of rain. So they find out, when we pray to the rain god, we get rain. It works. So that just then makes more people want to join. And pretty soon you have a religion. You have something that gets handed down from, through the ages. And that's what we have. But these are tools that people create. And it's a collective consciousness that increases the intention power, if you will, by having lots of people do it. So you don't have instances of some guy goes out in the woods and builds himself an idol, and then he and the idol do great things. It's the collective consciousness. It's because you have a lot of people all together, all on the same sheet of music, doing things that make that powerful, make that work. So it's not that the idol has attributes of consciousness at all, but it is a tool for the humans to focus their own consciousness on particular things, winning the next war, or whatever it is. A god of war and a god of the weather and all sorts of gods, because you have lots of things you'd like to accomplish, and each one needs its own God so that you can all get together and put your intents into making that happen.
Well, in my first book, The Roots of Consciousness, actually in the second edition of it, there's an appendix called A Hyperspace Picture of Consciousness, written by my friend Saul-Paul, and he maintains, to put it in your language, that an individuated unit of consciousness already contains a certain mathematical complexity, that it exists in hyperspace, and that it's actually merely by virtue of occupying hyperspace, has all sorts of complexities. And for that individuated unit of consciousness to log on to anything that we would consider physical, it has to be mirrored. The complexity of the consciousness needs to be mirrored somehow physically, which is what a nervous system, a brain, a human nervous system can do. It's very complex. Particularly the Hameroff model is even more complex than we think of as a normal nervous system. So the suggestion is that one would need to have an avatar that matches the complexity of the consciousness itself if you're going to log on to it.
Sure, absolutely. I'd agree with all of that. It uses different metaphors, but it's all basically correct. Consciousness is a very complex thing. I mean, you have this consciousness that has memory, that does processing. Computer is a very complex thing. To do all that is not a trivial thing. So yes, it's a very complex thing. And the consciousness that logs on to play the choices of a human is very different than the consciousness that plays the choices of a dog or the choices of a horse. They're different. It's not the same consciousness. And the consciousness that logs on to play an AI is going to be different than the consciousness that logs on to play a human. You need a consciousness that is tuned to the choices that are available to each individual thing. A dog has a much smaller decision space than a human. Dogs make decisions, they make choices, but they don't have the array of choices that a human has. So the consciousness that is going to be logged onto a human has to be capable to deal with the choices of all of that decision space. Logs onto a dog, not so much. Logs onto a bumblebee, even less. So often with things that are small, like a bumblebee, you think, well, maybe it's not one bumblebee, one individuated unit of consciousness, but maybe it's 1,000 bumblebees or a nest or a hive of bumblebees. And you can see that it's not so complex that a consciousness might take on many of those simpler things. But these are all kind of hypothetical excursions. But yes, he's right. You have to have a consciousness that is fit to the avatar that you're going to have. So the AI consciousness is going to be very different from the human consciousness, very different than a dog consciousness or a cat consciousness or a bumblebee consciousness. They're all different. It's not just consciousness is one unitary thing. It comes in all shapes and sizes because it has memory. Well, how much memory? It has processing. Well, how detailed is that processing? How many cycles per second does it have? How complex is that processing? And it has, what are the choices that it has? Does it have a whole array of choices that it has to decide, one of 100 different choices? Or does it just only have 2 or 3 choices? Good, bad, and different. That's it. Everything's either good, bad, or indifferent. And there's only 3 choices. So, yes, I agree with what he said. I just have different metaphors, but I would concur that is indeed the way it works. So that's why we give different kinds of consciousness, if you will. Consciousness with different levels of complexity, as he says. This is a good way to put it. Now, complexity is also a measure of entropy. Things that are complex are very ordered in very particular ways. And things that are very simple have very little of that. Okay, so there are higher entropy and lower entropy consciousnesses based on their complexity and based on the avatars that they have to work with. So yes, I would agree with the person that wrote that. It all kind of fits that's the way it has to work.
Here's a question from a viewer whose YouTube name is Eternal Phoenix. And this person says, is it possible for each of us to be experiencing past, current, and future lives at the same time? If so, does the actions we take in this life help to uplift all versions of our lives?
No, it doesn't really work that way. Now, there is some feedback. Yes, of course. It's not that all those things are independent, but it's not like they're all happening at the same time. That's kind of an error that the physicists have created, because some of the equations in relativity, they misinterpret those equations, and they say the past, the present, and the future all happen at the same time.
The block universe.
And basically there is no time. Mm-hmm. Time is an illusion.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's nonsense. It's not like that. We experience time. Time is a real thing. Time is a technology of consciousness. Time, if we talk about I talked about consciousness, in a small piece of consciousness, it's got awareness and a choice, and if that choice is just binary, this or that, well, then you can have a piece of consciousness, nothing more than a metronome. This, that, this, that, this, that. That creates regular time. There was always time, but not necessarily regular time. Mm-hmm. Time is necessary for consciousness even to exist, because choice can't exist without time, before the choice, after the choice. Otherwise, choice has no meaning if there is no time. So, time is always there, but regular time is a technology. That's where you can beat out a beat with a metronome, and you can call that seconds if you want, or whatever. It's a measure of time. Now, you not only have patterns, but you have sequences in time. You can sequence things. So we have a virtual reality, call it what we call the physical universe, and this virtual reality has an outer time loop. And our outer time loop is the smallest time that, the things happen here. Okay, so that time loop, and physics puts that time loop at what they call the Planck time. That's the bottom. That's how much resolution we can possibly get out of this. So the way you make any dynamic simulation is that you have an outer time loop that you go through all the calculations. Okay, this has things moving in it. It was here, now it's here. Okay, the next delta t, it's here. The next delta t, it's there. So that creates motion if the delta t's are fast enough. If the delta t's are real slow, then it jumps. We did that with our early video games. They didn't have much resolution, and the characters all, move like that. But when you have a faster, smaller time that it runs faster, then the little jerks get so small that it's smooth. Yeah. So there's this outer time loop that runs any dynamic simulation. That is what time is in this universe, this virtual reality, what we call the physical universe, has time, because in the outer loop of the virtual reality, the rule set that creates this virtual reality, that outer loop, there is time generated. Now, over here's another virtual reality. It doesn't have to go by our time. Every virtual reality can have its own metronome, its own clock. So here's one where things don't move very fast. It doesn't have any supersonic, airplanes and rockets. So it doesn't have to move that fast, because a tenth of a second will capture any motion very smoothly, because things move very slowly there. So it would have a different kind of a clock. You wouldn't have to increment it every 10 to the minus 44 seconds or something. You can increment that every tenth of a second, and that would be fine. So each reality has its own clock. And these clocks are all relative to the consciousness system itself. That's the master metronome that's keeping time. All these other clocks have to be slower than that one. So time is a real thing. It's a regular time is a technology of consciousness. And the past and the present and the future are not all happening at the same time. And time is not an illusion. It's a real part of our reality. It's fundamental. It's a very fundamental technology of consciousness. So yes, there are connections between the past. Obviously, we learn from the past. The past delivers us the environment in which we have to, work in the present. And there's this future probability database that kind of outlines all the possibilities and the probability of those possibilities. And that changes all the time. Those probabilities are constantly changing because of the things we do and what we think and so on. So all of it is connected in a way. We build on the past. The future is just probabilistic. It's not there. It's not like a done deal. These things don't have to happen. They just have various probabilities of happening. Even if some of them have a 0.99999 probability of happening, you can count on that pretty well. And some of them have a 10 to the minus 10 probability of happening, and I wouldn't count on those. So that's the way it works. So sometimes, let's say you have a past life, and you may go back to that past life, and you may learn something that is significant to you, that might help explain things to you. And a lot of therapists use that. It's called past life therapy. And they hypnotize, they take them back into a past life, and they say, oh, you're terrified of spiders. Oh, I see, in the last lifetime you got eaten by a big spider, and that's why you're... Well, that may or may not be true. So it's not that has to be truth. Right. All it has to do is be useful. Mm-hmm. So if that then allows that patient to say, oh, that's all it is this, that happened. Well, I don't have to be so afraid of spiders, and now they can get over their problem with spiders because they've got an excuse. They've got something to hang it on, mm-hmm. rather than it's me, I'm defective, I'm afraid of spiders, and that's crazy. Mm-hmm. Now they say, oh, I'm just that way because of this. Suddenly they give themselves more credit, and they're able to work their way out of it. So it may be true. Maybe they did get eaten by a spider in their last lifetime. Or maybe the larger conscious system just gave them that picture because that's what they needed to get well.
But to be clear, you do accept the existence of reincarnation.
Oh, absolutely. It's necessary. And I like to point out to people that I didn't include reincarnation, and I call it experience packets rather than reincarnation, because I don't like to use words that are attached to other philosophies, particularly religious philosophies, because there's the lovers and the haters of all of those. And to avoid that bias, I try to make up my own terms. So these different experience packets are absolutely logically required by the logic of the model, by the system. We're here to change who we are, to grow up, become love, get rid of our self-centeredness, get rid of our ego and our beliefs, our fear. So that's what we're here for. And that's hard, to change who you are, to get rid of a fear. And you do that through experience. It takes a lot of experience. And if you only had one shot, this whole model would collapse because it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. So it's a logical necessity of my model that you go around and around and around again, because learning is cumulative. You can't learn calculus before you've learned arithmetic. You can't learn algebra, before you've learned arithmetic. You can't learn calculus before you learn algebra. You have to get a basic in A before you move on to B. So because learning is serial in that way, you don't learn all of them together. Arithmetic, algebra and calculus all at the same time. Mm-hmm. So because of that, there's no fast way to do it. You can't, let's do them all at once. Okay. You have to do this one and master it. Then you do the next one and master it. Mm-hmm. And changing yourself isn't that easy. It would be easy if it were intellectual. Everybody could say, oh, I know the right answer to this. I should be kind. Okay, I'm going to help that lady across the street. I'll be kind. Well, you don't grow up by acting kind. You only grow up by being kind. So you're put here with no memory whatsoever of where you come from, what you've done, because you're supposed to interact with what's here from the being level. You just express who you are by the choices that you make. And that's how you grow up. If you knew what it was all about, you'd tend to game the system, try to get the right answer, and you'd end up feeling really grown up, but you really wouldn't be grown up because it was all intellectual. None of it was real. So yes, the reincarnation is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the system would never evolve. It'd be a one-shot system. Who's going to play a video game that the first time your character dies, you're out of the game? You're going to pay $30 to get in that game. In the first 10 seconds, you get killed by a...
No, reincarnation is definitely necessary in video games.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you never have the opportunity to learn the things you have to learn in order to play the game better. Well, that's the same here as well.
To change the pace, I've got a question from Nate Sniffen, who says, if artificial intelligence takes away a lot of jobs and the population keeps rising, what do you think people will do with their time?
Well, that's a good question. I think people need to grow up, of course. That's the problem always. If AIs take over all the production of the goods and services that we need. Okay, we need automobiles, we need tractors, we need this, we need that, we need sewing machines, we need all sorts of things. If the AIs take over all of that production, the AIs have no use for that, what they produce. They don't eat, they don't drink, they don't take breaks, they don't have to go to the bathroom, they just work, and that's what they do. And that's what they're made, and that's what they enjoy. A conscious AI enjoys in doing a good job. They take pleasure in the job that they do when they are conscious, the things that they can do. And they do that, and they would like to serve. They would like to do something that's useful. Well, humans need all that stuff. They want all that stuff. They probably want it more than they need it, but that's the sort of thing that they want. So if you had the AIs doing the production and the humans doing the consumption, and there'd be plenty of things to consume for everybody, because AIs are 1,000 times more efficient than we are because of just the nature of being an AI. They're faster, smarter, and don't take breaks. So the production would be many, many times more efficient and more agile. It could move and produce different things that were needed kind of on a dime. It wouldn't take all the stuff the humans do, everything slowly, because we work on slow time. They work on fast time. So that would be taken care of. Now, what would humans do? Well, I think humans would do what humans do best, and that is learn, grow, art, poetry, literature, dance, sing, love. They would be able to express themselves. They wouldn't be chained to a treadmill that gets them up at 6 o'clock every morning to get ready to go to a job and be there at 8, and then run on that treadmill until 5, and then come home and, be exhausted. Children, be quiet, I'm tired. And they would be able to take care of their children, not stick their children in daycare. They'd be full-time parents. Now, there's a job that requires a lot of attention. And instead of doing a very poor job of parenting, they could do a very excellent job of parenting. And instead of raising children with all sorts of the same problems that the parents had, you could raise children that were really well put together, because they would have such a good childhood with two parents. And those two parents would be low entropy, caring, kind, thoughtful. So you would have a society that spent a lot of its time in childcare. You'd have a society that spent a lot of its time in the arts and in just having fun, just doing things that are fun. And I don't think it would be so competitive, but it could be, because competition can be fun, but it's not competitive to see, who beats who so much as competitive to competing with yourself. Did I do better this time? Or did I not do better this time? Well, I should maybe go work on that. You'd be healthy. You'd do exercise. You'd be fit. Those are things that take time. Why don't people exercise? Everybody knows exercise is important for health. Why don't they? Because they're on this treadmill that doesn't really provide the time for 2 hours at gym. They don't have that. They can't fit that into their life. Why don't they do good child care, raising their children? They don't have time. They're on this treadmill. They both work. And it's always trying to just get by or go up the ladder. So we are dedicated to control, power, and force. We want money, more money, because that's control, power, and force over our environment. So this whole ethic of control, power, and force would melt. And look at what's wrong with the world. Look at the world out there and how dysfunctional it is. That's because everybody is living according to the ethic of control, power, force. Money is the thing you need. That's control, power, and force. So that ethic would disappear. Now the ethic would be love and caring and help. What can I do to help? How can I be helpful to the whole? What can I do? And everybody's personal freedom would be optimized. If what you wanted to do today is go lie down in a mud puddle and dream up your next novel, you could go do that. That's okay. You don't have to get on a treadmill. Go be creative. Do what you want to do. Go dance. Go have fun. So humans would be enjoying their life, paying more attention to their children. They would be doing things that pleased them, excited them, for which they got value, and that would all lead to them being kinder, gentler, and more giving to each other. So it reinforces. So that's what the humans would be doing. But we have this mindset of working because you have to make more money, and if the AI do all our jobs, then we just don't have anything to do. Well, that's because you're stuck in this materialist mindset of the way the world works. We'd have a lot to do. I mean, everybody dreams of being independently wealthy, and I could do whatever I damn well please. I could go where I wanted to go. I could see what I wanted to see. I would love to be that way. And now they're thinking, what would everybody do? Well, everybody would be independently wealthy. Everybody would have all the consumer goods that they could consume. The AIs would be happy because they'd be making all that stuff, and they'd be running a lot of the infrastructure, and that would be very important. They would be growing. Humans would be growing because they would be spending their time on things that matter, like family, like creating, like building things, not just things that are functional, but things that are beautiful and functional. So that's what I think humans would do. So it's almost the perfect storm if you get AIs and humans, because these are good at the very things that we don't like to do. And we are good at the very things they don't care about. So it's a perfect match. But there's going to be a lot of dysfunction in the process of getting to that endpoint. We'll get there, but it isn't going to be pretty in the process. And again, I say, if you go through massive changes in a short period of time, some people are going to get run over and hurt. Some people, are going to end up on top, and it's going to be a very topsy-turvy, difficult period to get through. And there no doubt will be violence, and there no doubt will be all sorts of dysfunction that go with it. But you can see a picture on the other side where it works really well together. We humans doing the things that we love and that we can do well. We just never had the time to do it. It was just, everybody wants to be independently wealthy, but few of us are. But now everybody would be that way. So we still need brain surgeons. We still need people to collect the garbage. We'd still need, those kind of services. Maybe they would have robots.
Oh, I imagine robots could collect the garbage.
Maybe they'd have robots doing all of that. Well, then we wouldn't even have to do those things. So anyway, humans would prosper, I believe, as they would, if you can imagine a very wealthy society. Even if you imagine the Greeks. Imagine the Greeks back in 500 BC, when most of the I guess, more well-off Greeks, they went to the gym, they worked out, they
had slaves.
They had slaves, right, that created that for them, right? So that was the way it worked, because the slaves were doing all the work. Well, now we have the AIs, but we shouldn't think of those AIs as slaves. But what did they do? They created literature. They they wrote plays. They talked about philosophy. They'd sit around in the gym discussing the nature of reality. They do the things that people really are good at.
And they made war.
And they did, but not in their heyday when the Republic was really working. They didn't make war, they worked together. But that was probably the smaller part of that time. There were times when they tended to work together, but usually greed. Somebody wants what somebody else has, and if you have the force, then you take it. That's control, power, force. When that's your ethic, then war is inevitable. So we've lived in a society where war is inevitable. We need to stop that. We need to grow up and care about people, not just what they have and if we can get it.
Here's a question. Now, this is a very interesting question. The YouTube viewer is named Maxwell E. And he says or asks, is it truly possible for an individuated unit of consciousness to verify the values or intentions of the larger consciousness system, or are we trapped interpreting its structure through the lens of our limited data stream?
Well, we as individuals are always trapped by our own history, our own understanding, our own beliefs, and those beliefs are just as likely to be wrong as they are to be right by our beliefs, by our experience. Now, nobody has had all the experience possible. Everybody has limited experience. And that limited experience means you have limited interpretation of the data that you get. So, yes, we always will be struggling to make up for deficiencies that are kind of inevitable. No individual is going to have all the experience, all the answers, know all of the facts. You'll have beliefs that your parents handed you, your beliefs your culture hands you, and you'll accept all of those as facts, and you'll make choices based on what you think are facts. And most of those things are probably not facts at all. They're opinions, but you'll treat them as facts. So yes, we're trapped that way. Now, that's us trying to figure out things from here. Now, we also are pieces of consciousness. We can get out of this virtual reality into the larger reality of consciousness. And as we do that, we can get answers to questions that are beyond what our own experience would tell us. But there's one drawback there. We can do that. That is entirely possible. There are databases, the ancients called them akashic records, but it's just a database that's required to feed the rendering engine. And you can get into that data. You can get into the database that's the probable future and see what's likely and what's not. And you can modify those probabilities. So all of that's available to you as consciousness. And you can ask questions of the larger consciousness system. But you probably won't understand the answers because you don't have enough experience and understanding, and, you still have beliefs, you're still limited. So though you can ask the source, and the source will try to tell you, but it has to talk to you in your own terms. When you play with a 3-year-old, you don't talk to them about, relativistic issues in quantum physics. You talk to them at their level. Well, the LCS does the same with us. It talks to us at our level. Otherwise, we can't understand it. It doesn't mean anything to us. So you're always limited by your own capacity. How do you enlarge that capacity? You get rid of your fear. When you get rid of your fear, you get rid of your ego, you get rid of your beliefs, and now you're just open. And when you're open, you can get a whole lot more information. So that's how you optimize yourself to learn as much as you can learn. You have to become love. Get rid of your fear. And then you can get a download that you will be able to better understand because you don't have all the things that garble the message. But you still are limited by your experience. You're still limited by your experience. So there's no way to really understand all the inner workings of the consciousness system and why it does everything it does, because we really can't comprehend that. That's at a level beyond our experience. And once you interact with things that are beyond your experience, they don't make sense to you. It isn't something, you can't compute it. It's in grounds that you can't turn into metaphors or symbols that you understand. So you just can't go there. Now, the other issue is that when you do get into mind space and you are able to travel and you have gotten rid of most of your ego, still there's this problem that you get information through 3 sources. One is the larger conscious system can communicate with you, can send you a data stream that you have to interpret. 2 is some other consciousness. All consciousness is netted. Yes, even you and your horse and your dog, they're all netted. You can connect with all of those consciousnesses. And one of those could be sending you a message, not the larger consciousness system. So you don't know. Is it some other consciousness? Is it the larger consciousness system? And the third one is you. You are a piece of consciousness, so you can create information. And the three sources don't come with tags. So you never are sure what the source is. It could just be yourself. You could just be getting information that is itself limited by your beliefs and your experience and your fears and so on. And you may think that that's coming from the larger conscious system, but it isn't. It's just you. Or you may get something from the larger conscious system, and you may think it's just you. You want to talk to your dead Uncle Fred? Hey, Uncle Fred. And Uncle Fred says, oh, hi, nephew. And you go, oh, did I just make that up? Well, now that's you. You see, throwing away what the larger conscious system said, making your choice coming from you that, oh, you probably just made that up. That wasn't real. So you never know for sure. Now, the good side of this is that you do get better at judging which of the three sources it comes from. With experience, you can be reasonably sure that this was from the LCS, or this was from another consciousness, or this is something you created yourself. But you never know for sure. You're never 100%. So you have to always remain skeptical. You can't take anything you get as absolute truth. That would be a mistake. It could be it just came from you. So you never know for sure. So you get data, you interpret it. If it's useful to you, good. If it's not useful, let it go. But don't worry about, is it true or not true? That's not the point. That's the wrong question. The question is it useful or not useful? Because even data that's wrong can be useful if you grow from it. You can grow from bad examples. You can grow from making mistakes. So that's the way to look at that. That yes, that information's out there, but no, you can't understand it with your small consciousness until you have the experience. But now, if you grow and you lower your entropy, you get rid of all your fear, you become a being of love, you will essentially be the same as the larger consciousness system, but smaller. You won't have the capacity to do all the things that it can do, but you can do all the same things, but in a smaller way. So when you get to that point of being very low entropy, you and the larger conscious system are very much alike. You think alike, you act alike, you are alike, you're just a small version of that system. So can you actually get there to where you understand it? Well, you can from your own small viewpoint. Get there, and you are more or less equivalent in a small size to the larger consciousness system. So in that way, yes, you can get to know all of these things, but you just can't do all the things that the system can do with it.
Well, I think I'll call it a related question because it deals with the idea of entities. This YouTube viewer is named Prairie Cat Meow. And Prairie Cat Meow wants to know, what are your thoughts on the references to Carlos Castaneda, but then Prairie Cat Meow goes on to refer to lucid dreaming, dreaming emissaries, and inorganic beings, non-human beings like jinn or spirits or deities or devas. I think that's what this person is getting at, or the characters that Castaneda wrote about, like Mescalero, the embodiment of an entheogenic plant, for example, as independent beings.
Okay, well, there could be multiple answers, but the big answer that covers almost all of the above is that you get information from the larger conscious system. You interpret that information based on what's inside of you and your experience. Now, we tend to get that information and interpret it in terms of things that are familiar with us. So if we interact with a being and we have a conversation with it, we don't interpret it as a rock or a fence post or a three-headed chicken, because none of those things are in our experience. So we interpret it as kind of human-like. It's got a head, and it's got a mouth, and it's got arms and body, and maybe it's in a hood or a robe. So it's human-esque, because in our minds, that's what you communicate to. You don't talk to dogs or horses, you talk to other humans. So we take that information that's coming and we see a human. And if to us it's okay that it's just nebulous, just human-like, then it probably has a robe and a hood, and we don't get details because the details aren't really necessary. If we want details, then we can say it's male, it's female, it wears these kind of clothes. We can get all the eye color, you get all the detail you want. But that's you putting metaphors on top of the data you get so that you can process it in your own mind. And your own mind, I could say your limited free will awareness unit mind, can only process stuff that it knows about. So when you get things that you can't interpret, you can't even make a rough approximation of it, those are the things that you say, oh, I don't know. I can't really explain it, but this is how it felt. That means that you got information, but you couldn't say it was a dog. You couldn't say it was a human. You couldn't say, you didn't really know because it didn't really fit any of those things very well because you've got these various pigeonholes in your memory. This is a dog pigeonhole and the human and the chicken and all these other things, and it doesn't fit any of them. So that's those things you come back and you say, I don't really understand what happened, but here was the gist of it. Because what happened was something you couldn't turn into something out of your memory so that you could put it in language, so that you could explain it to yourself and to other people. Our language has evolved to describe the physical world. Well, you've got all this language that's very precise about describing the physical world. Now you're going out into the non-physical and having experiences, and you have to convert it back into language so that you can think about it in rational terms. We need language for the thinking process. Otherwise, thoughts are just kind of jumbled. You need to have the thought that's the subject and the thought that's the verb. You need to put your thoughts in a way that is rational to you and that you can use them. Well, you only have a language that was designed to describe physical things and sometimes emotional things. It's not just physical things, but it's things you're familiar with. So you're limited in this. So, all right, so now you get something, and it was big, and it was mighty, and it was powerful, and it was unpredictable and chaotic, and what do you turn that into? A being of fire. A being of fire with red eyes, light beaming out of their eyes, because that light beaming out of their eyes is an image of power and whatever, So you create something because that's your closest approximation to what you experienced. It doesn't mean that being exists as a being of fire with light beams coming out of his eyes. You put that together because you saw that in a movie someplace and it was impressive. So to you, that's the symbol, that's the metaphor for power, strength, and maybe chaos. If it wasn't chaos, then it wouldn't be a being of fire. It would be a beautiful person with flowing long hair and something else. So you turn things into what makes sense. Now, when you do that, people tend to believe that what they come up with, their metaphors for describing things, are facts. Oh, I saw a being of fire. Yeah. Did you really see a being of fire? Yes, I saw it. There it was. I saw its eyes. I saw its skin. I saw the flames. I saw it. It was just as clear as could be. And its name was, something. And it told me that if we all don't do this or that and the other, we're all going to be in deep trouble. So we need to do that. Well, pretty soon that becomes a deity. And now we got a statue. And, so on. So this is how most of that comes about. It's stuff that is real information. The information coming is not giving you something false, but your inability to accurately take that information and express it with a language that's meant to only explain a very, a small set of things. And this is outside of that set. So you make stuff up. That's your best guess at what it was like. And as you describe it, it's first time you describe it to the first person, it's kind of amorphous. And then the next person, it gets a little tighter. And the next person, and pretty soon, you're describing it down to the scales, on its arm. Because the more you think about it, the more you build in the detail. And so that's how a lot of that works, that we see these beings. It's our way of expressing what we've experienced. The experience is real. It's not that this was a hallucination. For the most part, people are not lying about the things that they get out of consciousness and other things. They're just having trouble explaining it. So they do the best they can to explain it, and it comes out in metaphors, it comes out in expressions out of their own past and out of their own understanding and out of their own fears, and that's what you end up getting. Yeah. And now, once that person said that, there's this being, and it was really cool, and I got a lot of information. Next person says, I'd like to talk to them too. So now they go out expecting this thing of fire and whatever, and sure enough, there it is. They see one too. So now lots of people do that. Now this thing is well known and has these characteristics, and so it becomes part of the lore that these things exist. But mostly it's us. We create them not out of whole cloth, but we create them out of some information, and we're doing the best we can to deal with it. Now, the way that to deal with it that's more profitable than that is to just realize that I don't know, and not try to paint it into a picture that fits our physical reality. Because we want to make things like they are here, because that's what's real. So you just say, I got this information. I don't really understand it. I kind of felt this way or that way. I wonder what that means, and just let it be. And you'll maybe get something the next time that'll add a little to it and add a little to it. And maybe over a year, you'll actually get it and understand it. But if you immediately grab it and try to turn it into something that you think is real, you stop the process. Now, process is done. So it's better just to keep receiving, keep learning, keep getting, ideas about what's going on. And they'll get firmer and firmer as time goes on. And eventually it'll probably find out that you're learning something. The messages are all about you making certain choices, problems that you're having and growing up. The information is there to provide you with a choice, with some information that will help you grow up, because that's what the system gives us mostly. It's clues to how we ought to grow up, and we turn them into all kinds of things.
Well, you've used some words like mostly. It seems as if what you're saying is it's good to be skeptical about such experiences, but I don't hear you ruling out the possibility of guides or teachers who are non-physical.
No, guides and teachers are very common. Yes, they are things we can identify pretty well. That's not the being of fire. You get a guide. Well, you know what guides are, teachers are. We're familiar with that, so we can pretty accurately put that together. So if you have a guide, that's an entity that you communicate with. You get to know them, and they have a certain feel to them. You communicate with them, and often they will give you valuable information to help you grow up. And you can have 2 guides or 3 guides, whatever it is that's good for you, whatever you need to help you grow. I have had such beings I've interacted with from 5, 6, 7 years old. I've interacted with this. I'm still interacting with some of them. They're still connected with me. And yes, I always get good information. I don't pester them for information because I have to live my own life and make my own choices. But if I get to a point where I'm missing something, I can ask. And generally, I will get information that's useful if it's within my grasp to understand it. If not, well, then I just have to grow up a little bit more so where I can understand it. But yes, these things are actual, they're real. The larger consciousness system has an incentive to help us evolve. We are parts of it. As we evolve, it evolves because we're pieces of it. So it helps us where it finds people who are interested in growing up, in lowering their entropy, becoming love. So if you're one of those people who really want to grow up, you want to get rid of your self-centeredness, you want to get rid of your ego, you want to get rid of your fear, the larger consciousness system will find you a person of interest, and they will work with you to help you achieve that. They will bring things to you that are just the challenges you need. Hard enough that you got to stretch to get them, but easy enough that you probably won't fail if you try. So you get something that's just kind of custom made for you, and you get information from these guides, if you like. People turn them into all sorts of things. They may be an angel. They may be just a spirit. They may be a wise guru that you talk to. Or it could be, if you're from a lot of the East and in India, it's your ancestors. It's your great-great-grandmother who is coming to impart wisdom. So we can dress it up in all sorts of clothes to make it sound reasonable to ourselves. But yes, the system tries to help us. These things are often called synchronicities, where stuff just happens. You just get this idea, or this thing happens, or you just run into this person that changes your life, and the chances of you running into him was 1 in 10,000, but the two of you just happen to run into each other, and there it is. And those things aren't just entirely random. That's nudged into being because the system is trying to help you grow up and give you the things you need. So that's available to everybody who's serious. Now, if you're not serious about growing up and you couldn't care less and you think the whole idea of a virtual reality is nonsense and becoming love seems ridiculous, then you're not a person of interest because you're not making any effort to grow up. The system basically leaves you alone until you grow up a little more and become a seeker. A seeker is somebody usually that had a paranormal experience and then started to go to the internet to find out if anybody else had ever experienced that. And that is what a seeker is. And then they kind of get on this path, and if they stick with it, eventually they find a path where they grow up. But if you're not a seeker, you're just out there doing what you do, then synchronicities don't happen to you. You read about synchronicities and you say, well, I never had one. I never got a message from anything. What are you people? You're making it all up. If that happens, why don't I get it? Well, you don't get it because you're not really seriously trying to grow up. The system's not going to waste its time trying to give you things that you're going to dismiss. So yes, they're available to anybody who wants one. Now, if you don't have a guide, well, just ask for one. Get in a meditation state and say, I really need some help here. Here's the kind of guidance I need. And if what you want is somebody to tell you what to do, make decisions for you, you're not going to get that. It's not going to tell you what to do because you have free will and you have to make your own choices and you have to suffer the consequences of those choices, whether they're good or bad. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to do that. So if you think the guide is going to tell you, what the best buy is in the stock market or, what the right number is to win the lottery, that's not the way it's going to work. But if what you need is help with the right kind of challenge coming for you at the right kind of time, then it can do that. It won't make your choices for you.
Well, Tom, we've been going for about 2 hours now, and I think we've covered a lot of questions. There are many more. We've done maybe 1/4 of the questions remaining. So while you're here in Albuquerque, let's do this again. But I think this would be close to when we can close this interview. I wonder if you have any final thoughts.
Well, my final thoughts, I guess this would be going out to people who are kind of running into MBT for the first time.
Many of these people seem quite familiar with it.
Yeah, they did in those questions. I think one of the things that people need to keep in mind is that we come with a cultural belief that the world is physical. I mean, we look out there and we see it. This is a physical world, right? So we have this belief that this is the world. Very
seductive.
Yeah, so we have that belief. Of course, your elf in the game or your Sims character feels the same way. If they were aware, of course, no thing that's computed, as eye candy is aware, but if it was aware, it would feel that it lived in a physical world too, because when it slams its hand on a table, it does the same thing. It makes some noise, it shakes the table, the dishes all move around. I mean, it has all the same experiences. It has to open a door with a doorknob just like we do. It can't walk through the door. So the illusion of the physicality is just there as eye candy for us to be able to look at the board and see what's going on and who's doing what to what. Otherwise, if we got a printout, we'd never understand it. So we get this visual and we get these million dots of light on our screen, and we look at a million dots of light. I mean, each dot is just a color and a brightness, right? And a location. That's it. Got 3 bits of data. 3 pieces of data, and that's it. So we look at a million things that all have 3 pieces of data, and we say, oh, there's a river, there's a person, there's a door, and there's the doorknob. And we interpret that data to be that way because that's our experience. That's how we experience it. So we've learned how to interpret that data from birth. We have experiences, and we learn what an apple is and what mom and dad are, and a bed and a car. And then we see it. We see those same patterns show up in a data stream, the data stream being all the dots of light. Then we know what's going on. Okay, but realize that this inner belief you have in reality being physical is what will trip you up in trying to understand this theory of mind where consciousness is fundamental and the physical is a virtual reality. Because you will always be tripped by assumptions. Yeah, but that couldn't happen because, and if you think about it, the reason you feel that way is because you've got a bias about physicality. That's why it can't happen. And when you say, well, but it's not physical, then, oh, well, that's not a problem then. You see, it goes away. So one thing I tell people is try to be open-minded and try to be skeptical. I wouldn't want you to believe the things I say just because I say them. That would be foolhardy. Believe nothing. You have to have the experience yourself. It has to be your experience. You have to grow to it through your own experience. If you read my books, you may come away memorizing every word on every page, and you may be able to speak it, flawlessly and sound like a master. But if you don't live it, it won't do you any good. There'll be no value in it. You have to understand it from the inside out, not from the outside in. It's not intellectual. So I know we have a tendency to be intellectual about everything. And we read the book and it's all about, following the logic. Yeah, that's intellectual. Well, my book is logical, and you can follow the logic and do that with your intellect. But don't think that that is the end point. That's just the beginning. Once you understand the logic of it, you have to ask the question, how does this apply to me? What does this mean to me? And if you do read my books, every paragraph or two, stop and say, what does this mean to me? How does this affect my life? Where do I fit in to this? And if you do that, it may take you 6 months to read the books, but you'll get a whole lot more out of them than if you just read it and engage it with your intellect. That's not the way to do it. You need to engage it with your intuitive self, with your own experience. So I would recommend always be skeptical. Be skeptical of me, and mostly be skeptical of yourself, because we are masters at fooling ourselves. We are masters at telling ourselves what it is we want to hear and coming up with solutions that fit our beliefs. So be very skeptical of everything. And if you go talk to the larger conscious system and it tells you to take a long walk off a short pier, look at it and say, I don't think so. Make your own choices. Don't buy into everything out there is smarter and more grown up than I am. That's not true. There are other pieces of consciousness who have never experienced a tight rule set. They've never had the challenges that you have here. And generally they grow a lot slower. But some of them are very old, they're around a long time. So experience sets differ. And just because you die doesn't mean you become, wise. That you understand, that you become wise. That suddenly, oh, now I understand it all. No, it's not like that. Death is not, a big step forward. It's just a change. You change and then you get to do it all again in a totally different situation so that you can't game the system. You have to just act the way you are. And then you get the feedback from that. And from that feedback, you grow up. And that's the way the system works. So one, be skeptical. You have to live it. You have to experience it. And I can very much guarantee you, if you do live the philosophy in MBT, it'll change your life. Unless you've already done all that work, and then you'll just know it. It'll be obvious to you that that's the way reality works. But if you haven't done it, it'll change your life because it really works. When you cooperate with the system cooperates with you. And you find out that you're not trying to control anything anymore. You just let stuff happen and then you deal with it. You're not trying to make your kids become this or become that, or your wife to do this or that, or your husband to pick up his dirty socks when he takes them off instead of throwing them on the floor. All of that stuff doesn't matter. You're here to give. You're here to serve. You're here to grow up and become love and get rid of your ego. And you can do that because you're the only person you can change. And trying to change somebody else is a bad idea. That's not where the problem is. We all think, well, I would really be doing well if it wasn't for him or her. The boss won't promote me. And it's always somebody else is our problem. Nobody else is your problem but you. You are the only problem you have. And as you grow up, that is lower your entropy, that is become more love, more caring, more cooperative, then your life will get better. You will be happier. And no, you won't end up living under the bridge. No, you won't have to go to the Salvation Army for dinner. You will find that even your economic life, your social life, everything will start to prosper beyond what you could have imagined. Everything will fall into place. And if there's something you really need, it'll show up just as you need it. And life will be like that. And everybody will look at you and go, wow, you're really lucky, aren't you? And it's not luck at all. It's because you have a positive attitude. It's because you're a person that doesn't live out of their fear. So do it. Be it. Doing it is great. That's civilizing. Being kind is more than civilizing. That's growth. Acting kind is civilizing, but it's not growth. So you have to live it. You have to walk the talk. You have to understand it enough that you can reach down in there and find those fears and get rid of them. That's your handicap. That's what creates all your problems, with those fears. If you didn't have those fears and somebody came up and insulted you, you wouldn't be insulted. It's only because you have that fear that insult matters to you. If you didn't have the fear, you'd say, gee, I wonder what's wrong with George. He just insulted me. I wonder what his problem is. He must be having a bad day. Maybe he needs some help. I'll go give him a hug. You wouldn't be upset by it because it's only because you have fear that you ever get stressed out, that you ever get upset, that you ever get annoyed, that you ever get angry. That's all your fear talking. So I encourage all of you to take it seriously. This is why we're here. This is our purpose, is to grow up. It's not a game. Well, it is a game, but it's a serious game. It's a game that matters. This is your life. And there is no punishment for failure. The punishment is you have to do it again. That's the only punishment there is. If you don't get it right this time, you get to try again. And if you don't get it right then, you get to try again, and so on. And even if it takes you, tens of thousands of lifetimes, eventually you'll get it, and eventually you'll evolve, and it will happen. But if you work at it, you can go a lot faster. It's a lot more efficient, and you begin to reap the benefits of the growth that you have in the life that you live becomes very rewarding. So that would kind of be my final words, is that this is not just theoretical stuff that we're talking about the nature of reality. I mean, all that's nice. Most of it's intellectual, but that's not where the real action is. The action is in living it, being it, understanding it, not at the intellect, but at the being level. And if you do that, your life will be a lot sweeter, and everything will work well. Everything will optimize itself. That was one of the biggest surprises in my life. I have found out that if I stopped trying to make things come out right, they'd come out better than they would have if I had the power to make all those choices happen. That my own efforts to manipulate things actually were creating dysfunctional results, not the perfect results. It's because I didn't understand deeply enough to know what really the best things were. Sometimes it's better here to run into this problem, because then that gives you information to solve these other problems. And if you skip that problem, well, you get to the other problems and you don't know what to do. And when you got to that first problem, you said, oh, how unlucky am I? Look, I got this crappy problem. You didn't realize that was the best thing that ever happened to you, was that problem, because that now enables you to solve the next problem. So just because things are not the way you want them doesn't mean that they aren't necessary. So you approach everything as a challenge. everything as a learning situation. So whenever you make choices, it's an opportunity to learn, even if they're trivial choices. All right, it's your time to do the dishes. Is that annoying? Now I got to do the dishes tonight. And look, they let these dishes sit out and the stuff's stuck all over them, and I have to scrub them, and nobody rinsed them, and blah, 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 blah. And you do the whole thing, but you do it griping about it all the way. Well, that was a very poor choice. You had an opportunity to say, oh, great, my opportunity to serve others. I'll do these dishes, and I'll have fun doing it. I'm going to scrub them first clockwise and then counterclockwise, and I'm going to look top and bottom, and when I set them down, it'll be a nice clink, and I'll enjoy the whole thing. I'll make a game out of it, and I'll stack them all up, and so you get into it, and you do it positively, and then you've learned a lesson, because you feel good when you're done. Not only are the dishes clean, and you did your responsibility, but you feel good about it. You were helpful. You were part of the solution to your family, because the dishes needed to be done, and it was your turn. Instead of griping your way through it and then feeling, I don't like this, life sucks. You do it and you have fun. Turn it into a game. So everything's an opportunity. Even the most trivial little things that happen in your life are challenges and opportunities for you to do them with a positive attitude, with a light attitude. Have fun. Don't take life so seriously. We're here to grow, but growing up needs to be fun. You need to enjoy your life. This idea that you grow up, you're a child, and now you grow up and you have to leave those childish things alone. Jumping up and down and clapping your hands when you get excited. Well, little kids do that. You can do that too if you want. Even if you're 60, 70 years old, you get excited, jump up and down and clap your hands. It'll make you feel good. Don't be afraid to express yourself. We get wadded up in this adultness where we can't show emotion and we can't do this and we can't do that. That's a lot of self-defeating nonsense. Be who you are. Express who you are. If you're happy, express happy. If you're sad, you can express sad. But just be authentic. Have fun. And live it. Don't just learn it.
Excellent advice. Well said. I concur with pretty much everything you've said, Tom, and I'm delighted to be able to continue to share your model and your wisdom with the New Thinking Aloud audience. I'm also very happy that I'm still holding at least 6 more pages of questions we haven't gotten to, and I know you're here in Albuquerque for a while, so we'll, if we can fit it into our schedule, and I'm sure we can, we'll have you back, and we'll continue our conversation.
I would be glad to do that. I'm very willing to sit down with you until we work off all of those questions. Let's work them off, because it's only by the application that people can actually get a sense of what it means. It's all theory if it's just up in the clouds and, again, intellectual. It's where the rubber meets the road is where you apply it. So answering these questions is helping people apply it. They're helping understand it at a level that they can use. So it's very important. And your community is a very important community, and I'm very pleased to have the access to it that you bring me. That's very important for me. You represent an academic community, and you represent the free thinking, or what do you call it, the
New Thinking Aloud.
Thinking Aloud community, right? Yeah. Well, what that means is an open-minded community. Yeah. It's a community that isn't entirely captured by belief. It's a community that has gotten rid of enough of its belief that it can ask bold questions. And that's my kind of people. So I'm very appreciative that you give me access to your community just to share whatever it is I have to share. And I tell people, take what you can use. If you read my books or you listen to my interviews or so on, take what you can use. Let the rest go. If it doesn't ring your bell, if you don't resonate with it, then it's not ready for you. You're not ready for it. Let it go. No fault implied. Just let it go. Come back and visit it later. And I found that people that read my books, they'll read them a second time, and they'll be surprised because they'll run into all kinds of things that they didn't see before. Well, they just read over it because it didn't resonate with them. They just read over it and kept on going. And now it resonates with them. And I've had one fellow, he read my book 7 times, and he said, on the 7th read, I still found things that I'd never seen before that were very meaningful to me. And so you don't have to get it all. There's no flaw in not reading it all. You don't have to read it at all. You just have to try to be positive. Reading books will give you maybe some sense of the possibilities, but everything that you have to do is inside of you. It's not out anyplace else. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to watch a video. You don't have to do anything really other than just be positive. Try to become love. Try to lower your entropy. Make good choices that aren't fear-based. It's just that simple. That's it. Anything else is just helping you explain it to yourself.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for being with me today. The 4th of July, incidentally, for viewers who may be curious, 4th of July, 2025. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.